Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We see a lot of people registering or signing in right now. So if you don't mind, I'm going to give it another minute or two just to let people sign in successfully. They're coming in pretty rapidly right now. So give us a minute or two and we will kick things off. I appreciate your patience. All right, the onslaught of people coming in to slow down a little bit, so we will get started. Thank you for joining us for today's session on growing your business in the foreclosure auction market. My name is Rick Sharga. I'm the founder and CEO of CJ Patrick Company, and also the chairman this year of AREAA's default task force. And we've spent most of the year trying to provide educational information to agents who are interested in learning more about the foreclosure market. I am joined today by three friends, colleagues, and experts in their given field. Mike Jansta from Altisource and Hubzu, Christopher Link from Covius and RealtyBid, and Jennifer Geller from Zome and Zome. Sorry, Jennifer, I had to do that. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their companies, but some housekeeping before we get into it. You are going to be delighted to learn that today is not going to be a barrage of PowerPoint slides. This is going to be a panel discussion. We're going to be talking about a lot of things related to the auction market. Everybody except the panelists will be on mute, but that doesn't mean we don't want you to participate. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat area, and we will address them as we get toward the end of today's webinar. We're hoping to make this an interactive session. That's really about it. So without further ado, I'm going to go in reverse order and do ladies first and let Jennifer tell you a little bit about herself and Zome, and then we'll go to Christopher and then to Mike.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you for the invite, and thank you, Michael and Christopher, for joining me today. I am Jennifer Geller. Many of you know me as Jennifer Calvert. That was my previous name. So there's a lot of people that I tend to run into and they're like, oh, I see you as Jennifer Geller. I didn't know you're the same person. So I always like to start off with that. But here at Zome, we have a auction platform. We do asset management as well as auction. Most of our inventory for a long time was Mr. Cooper inventory because, as you know, we are part of Mr. Cooper. But during the pandemic, our business development team did a great job in reaching out to different sellers, and we have onboarded pretty large amount of new inventory. So we're getting, we don't have the inventory that we had prior to the pandemic, but we definitely are almost there because of the clients that we have picked up. I will say that of the clients we've been onboarded with that send us REO and other types of foreclosure properties or asset management, we do have two of those sellers that are allowing us to use our agent network. So I'm excited to be involved in that. We're seeing increased business from those two. So we are able to assign within our network through Mr. Cooper, of course, Bank of America Assets, and Freedom Mortgage. So we've been excited about that, and those are clients that continue to grow and will of course affect the agents that are within our Zome panel because those are assets that would be available for you to receive in an assignment.
Thank you, Jennifer. Christopher?
Great. Welcome everybody, and thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Rick. So I'm with Covius is a large company that most of you have never heard of. We operate, most of our silos are in the background. So we do doc services, we do HOA, we do originations, we do securitization, due diligence, things like that. I'm lucky enough to run our two consumer-facing assets, which are the auction platform, which we'll talk about today, RealtyBid, and our asset management side of the business. We do not have a captive servicer, so all of our business is third party. We also service the Freedom assets along with our asset management business through the Pyramid platform for the most. So,
Chris, you froze there for a minute right after you said Freedom Assets.
oh, pesky Texas internet. So we operate Freedom assets, and we assign all of our assets through the Pyramid platform. So if you're in the Pyramid platform and you're in the area when we have an asset, our asset managers can hit you with those.
Michael?
All right. Hi, I'm Mike Chansta with Altisource. Similar to Covius, a lot of people haven't heard of Altisource. It's the parent company to 18 different real estate businesses, all in residential real estate, with the exception of one asset management platform for commercial. But the main business we'll be talking about today is Hubzu. That's the online auction platform, where we also market foreclosure sale properties, which is kind of the topic of today's event. We also have Altisource Trustee Services that does kind of back office services and outsourcing for trustees and attorneys. The Equator platform, similar to Pyramid, where task management and Equator agents are assigned REO properties. Altisource Field Services is another one that kind of manages properties that are in foreclosure, through foreclosure, and post foreclosure for those beneficiaries. To keep them out of the HOA's hair in the beginning, and then to kind of manage those assets through REO if they make it there. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and excited to talk with Jennifer, Christopher, and obviously Rick too about this topic. I'm super passionate about foreclosure sales, so this is a thing that I'm excited for this business to get rocking like it looks like it's going to.
Mike is not kidding about being excited about or passionate about foreclosure sales. Mike and I have known each other for probably better part of 15 or 20 years at this point. And we met when I was working at Realty Track, and Mike was the VP of marketing at auction.com, and then later worked together at auction.com. So all three of the folks, and Mike has run foreclosure auctions and bought at foreclosure auctions, and so all three of the folks we have today are really experts at this field. I wanted to kind of set that. Sorry, Mike.
Licensed auctioneer now too. I don't know if I told you that. I
did not know that. So maybe we'll have you do a sample call before the end of the webinar.
Auction.
Anyway, I always love the AREAA attendees. I don't know if you guys are looking at it, but the chat window is blowing up just with people saying hello and howdy from various parts of the country. So great to see everybody so engaged already. Jennifer, there was a question about how agents can become part of your network. Is that something you can answer easily, or is it a more involved conversation?
Sure. I will say that our process to be vetted as an agent is, and I see a lot of the agents on here are within our network, and they can probably agree with me on this, but there is a lengthy process that we require quite a bit, like general liability, and a background check. And no, it's not just a background check that you have, per your state for your license. It is one that Zone requires, and that's usually that's the biggest hiccup. Other than that, most of the things you'll already have on you for other clients that you're with. In order to get onboarded with us, you would reach out to me, and I think, Rick, you said that you were going to be sharing our contact information within this call. So you can reach out. I can't guarantee that we're hiring in certain areas. If you're in Miami-Dade and you're not already, on our panel, you're probably not going to get hired, just because I already have so many agents in that area, and there's no need. I would hate for you to have to onboard and waste your time if you're not going to see an REO. So I am selective in where I am hiring, but I always appreciate the reach out and see if we have a need in the area. Right now, and I think we'll talk about this later on in the discussion, but I am finding I need agents in more rural areas. So that seems to be where the REO is. But again, reach out and see if there's a need, and I can address you in that email.
Christopher, Mike, are there opportunities to become part of networks or groups at your two companies?
Absolutely. We operate off the pyramid platform, and all of the same things are required to be in that network. And we go, frankly, by proximity and then performance. So, how you perform for other assets, or looked at for who we assign first. But REO is one piece. We'll be talking about the auction piece and how we can engage you guys for that as well.
Yeah, so before the end of the webinar, I'm going to put everybody's email addresses in the chat so that if you'd like to reach out, you'll be able to do that easily. And Mike, Altisource, Hubzu?
It's very similar on the Equator platform. Equator is where agents get assigned to REOs that come in through the various servicers that use the Equator platform. I think Equator's been around since 2005 or 2003 or something like that. So I think it's just under 20 years. We're about to hit 20 years. And we're just continuing to keep that updated. And but like Christopher was saying, like, we're going to talk about kind of foreclosure sales today, and these are things where agents really aren't assigned. But I think there's a big opportunity for agents. And someone had just said they were excited about the booming pre-foreclosure business in the chat, right? And that's where everything's going. It's going upstream just because the fish need to spawn, so they're just going up the river, right? And that's where the inventory is. So I'll let Rick take us away into that sphere.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to talk about salmon swimming upstream to spawn, but appreciate the metaphor anyway, Mike. So yeah, let's do that. And I want to start just kind of setting the agenda by talking a little bit first about where auctions fit in the process. Traditionally, agents that have worked in the distressed property market have waited for lenders to repossess properties, which, as you all know, the industry refers to as REO homes, real estate owned, because the industry has absolutely no imagination or creativity. And agents would look for those listings, or brokers would look for those listings. And kind of going in reverse order, REOs only become REOs because they haven't sold at a foreclosure sale. And those foreclosure sales typically are held either at or adjacent to a courthouse in non-judicial states where they're executed by trustees, or they're done via sheriff's sale in judicial states at various locations as well. But they're live events for the most part. We're seeing some of them actually go online now, but for the most part, they're live events. And typically the servicer or the trustee is trying to sell that asset to collect as much of the amount of loan as they can to satisfy the financial requirements of the note holder, of the mortgage holder. Typically, the majority of people that buy at those auctions are investors, not always, but typically. And there are a certain number of those properties that don't sell. But we're in a very different cycle this time than what we've seen in past cycles when it comes to foreclosures. If you go back to the Great Recession, the overwhelming majority of properties that entered foreclosure became REO. And that's because the overwhelming majority of properties that were in foreclosure, the borrowers were underwater on their loans. They owed more on their loans than the property was worth. The note holders couldn't reduce the property price enough to incent investors to buy them at auctions. Wound up being cheaper for investors to wait for the lender to repossess the property, eventually list it with an agent for sale and buy it on the market that way. In today's market, 93% of borrowers in foreclosure have positive equity. And it's not just a little bit of positive equity. The last time I took a look at this, there were about 270,000 people in foreclosure. Over 100,000 of them had between 20 and 50% equity. Over 60,000 of them had between 50 and 75% equity. and almost 30,000 of them had more than 75% equity. So 190,000 of the 270,000 borrowers in foreclosure had at least 20% equity in their homes. And what we've been seeing, this is what Mike was talking about when he said going upstream, is more and more of these distressed homeowners are actually leveraging that equity and selling their house prior to the foreclosure sale. And so fewer properties are actually getting to auction, even though we're starting to see an increased number of foreclosure starts. Of the properties getting to auction, and Mike, you can vouch for me on this one. Prior to the pandemic, the sell-through rates at auctions was generally somewhere between 30 and 40%.
Yeah, that's our experience. Yeah.
And in today's market, it's closer to 60 to 65%. So we have fewer properties getting to auction and more properties on a percentage basis selling at the auction. So if you're an agent waiting for those REO listings, your strategy is kind of trying to win last war, and probably not a good strategy for today's market. But the question I always get from agents is, how can I participate in auctions? And what they really mean there, I'll crack the code for you, is there's no commission available on those properties at an auction. So why should I be bothering there? But I wanted to talk a little bit about why agents should be looking at these auctions and alternate ways for them to make some money at these. And I know, Mike, you have a lot of thoughts on this, but before I jump to you, I wanted to maybe start with Christopher and give Jennifer a couple minutes, and then you can be the cleanup hitter on this one. But Christopher, I know agents. Why should agents really be concerned about participating in auctions in today's market?
Well, so I think we can talk about a few different ways. Participating at auction at the courthouse steps is one thing. Participating with buyers and sellers before the auction begins is really, I think, a bigger opportunity. Is now I'm not going to get it out of my head that houses are spawning upstream, but that's really the thing I've been pushing, and it's counterintuitive to our business model. We don't make any money unless we sell something at auction. Well, all of Rick's numbers are exactly correct, and we're seeing historic lows of assets actually making it to auction. So as a broker, as an agent, as an investor yourself, because most of you have that opportunity, I would look at ways that you can either buy for yourself at the courthouse steps. You're going to probably be more educated than almost anybody that goes down there. It is like a scene from the Star Wars bar when you go to some of these auctions of Dallas County is right down the road from me, and it's an interesting group. But then going upstream and really looking at the folks that have notices of default that are filed, and going to them, and if 75% of those filed notices of default have equity, letting them out of the trap by finding a way to either buy the property yourself or bring a buyer of yours really is a solid way to do it. And then lastly, if you have listings, we have a program that basically allows us to list your stuff for free on our website. And if it sells, you get the $150 back that you put up to put it on the site. And it's, a good way to set the market, because that's what auction is truly setting what the market price is in an area, because you're dealing with national footprints. I mean, all three of us have a national footprint, and there are buyers from Georgia buying in Texas. There's buyers from California certainly buying in Texas, much to my dismay sometimes. And it sets the market for what that asset's worth. So all three of those things, I think, are good ways that you could get involved in the auction process. Very few of them require you actually buying the property. But if you do, there's some good ways to sell, to be a buyer on somebody else's behalf and get a fee. All of those things will work for you.
Jennifer?
Yeah, Chris, that you made great points. I was at the courthouse. I'm in Dallas area as well. So of course we're a Super Tuesday state. So I've attended a couple of times just in the last few months, and we go down there thinking we're going to have 7 to auction, and there may be several that get pulled, but in the end we'll cry maybe 4 or 5, and we've had 100% for 2 months in a row. So there are people that are down there purchasing. There are very savvy purchasing investors that are there. But at the same time, I'm also seeing people that have never been to an auction before, and they're wanting to get into the business. And that is a way that you could be down there networking and finding people that don't know anything about this industry. And you could maybe be there, giving them advice and building that relationship for future transactions. If there's not a transaction that occurs on that day with them, maybe you help to find them another property where they're wanting to use that investment money. Maybe you have a pocket listing or something that they can be aware of, or help them if they are the winning bidder in the future when they are, have flipped the property and they're ready to sell it. Maybe you could advertise for them in your MLS and, become their agent of choice, because they're new to this whole industry. And I'm having to go through and explain the process, and, you need to huddle up over here because this is where these are going to be cried. And then if you want that property, go over. It's very, I've not seen it like it is right now. People have money that they want to spend on real estate and they don't know where to find it. So I highly encourage you to go to those foreclosure sales and get to know the people. And yes, there are some odd ones out there, but hey, they're buying. So I think it's a great opportunity. If you haven't done it, at least get familiar with it, and you'll see that it's a lot of the same group that shows up all the time, but there are new ones out there.
Mike, what would you add to that?
I think Jennifer and Christopher made great points. And what, like the Super Tuesday states, I'm in Texas, I'm in Austin, a little bit south. That Dallas sale, it's out in front of the courthouse, but it's a really organized sale. Like all the different trustees that are set up, they have their booths and they're handing out water, and they've got their crowds and they're handing out lists, and the Rodney reports there handing out their lists of properties with all the data around it. And I've always said to agents, like, what else are you doing on Tuesday morning? Do you want to go to your brokerage sales meeting, or go out and be around 100 people that each have $300 to $1 million in cash in their pocket, right? So like you are just swimming with the sharks there, and it's a great place to be another shark in that group right there. So whether they're new buyers or they're seasoned buyers, being out at that foreclosure sale, where I'm in Travis County, Texas. I don't know if you guys know this, but I know everyone on the phone does. There's 254 counties in Texas. Like no other state has anywhere close. It's kind of ridiculous how small the counties are in this giant state. Georgia does the same thing on the first Tuesday of every month. They have that foreclosure sale in every county, and they have 189 counties. So on one day across 2 states, you have the better part of 500 counties to get, of your choice to go and attend a foreclosure sale. And it happens almost every day in places like Los Angeles County. I saw some people jump in Ventura County. They do it, I think, once a week or once every 2 weeks, and it'll be out on the courthouse steps. And it's really easy to show up in your market at that. It doesn't happen every single day, but going out to those sales, and there are people with cash. I mean, almost every state requires you to pay in full at that sale. So if somebody came with the intention to buy a property, they have a couple $100,000 in their pocket in cashier's checks. That's a person you kind of want to know. I mean, they're ready to pull a trigger on something, right? Just as Jennifer was saying, a novice buyer, there's home buyers that show up at these sales as well, because there's not a lot of inventory on the market. Austin's growing like crazy. I went out to the foreclosure sale to bid on a property here in Travis County, and there was 2 families that they moved in here from India, and they were just duking it out over this property. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to buy it. It's going over retail, and so there's going to be that family that's unsuccessful, an investor that's unsuccessful, serious investors that say, hey, if you can find something that fits this criteria, this buy box, call me and you can represent me as the buyer. So there's a lot of opportunities. But I've also thought that if you have investors like doctors and dentists and or even family groups, family offices and things of that nature that want to get involved in acquiring properties at these foreclosure sales, and you can show them the pro formas that show, hey, if you buy this and rent it over 10 years, here's the money you're going to make. And when you sell it, even just based on inflation, you're going to make tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on this real estate property. You can be their person that shows up with their cashier's checks and bid on their behalf. You got to get a power of attorney, like check your state and talk to your broker on how it works. And you can charge a success fee, right? You can have a form from your state association of realtors that says, hey, I'm going to represent you as the buyer. And if I help you acquire this property, you're paying me this percent or this flat fee. Christopher was talking about the rehab on the property. If I manage that rehab and it's a total renovation at $150,000, I'm charging you 10% to manage it. Well, it's $15,000 right there. Or if it's a paint and carpet and it costs $13,000, it's $1,300, but it only takes a couple hours, right? So there's creative ways that, even though there's not a lot of listings hitting the MLS right now, when properties do go to these foreclosure sales. And I really like Jennifer's point about, just showing up there and making business outside of that sale, right? It's not just what's in that store. It's where you can be creative and doing the networking and create business in other places. And so,
so
this whole river of gatherers, like you can wait for the AREAs to gather at the mouth of the river, or you can hunt upstream.
Yeah, and I think you both just made a really good point there. There are people walking around with literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in cashier's checks, and a lot of them leave frustrated because they weren't able to buy anything. But if I were a real estate agent, I would want to know all those people because I know they're looking to buy and they have cash. And so those become really, really good friends for you to make. And Mike, you and I knew an agent who used to use an auction platform and actually used it to create her practice. In 1 year, I believe she peaked at doing 85 or 90 transactions where she would be kind of the bird dog. She would scout out properties that were coming up for auction for her investor clients. She would get a power of attorney letter and proxy bid on their behalf at the auctions. And in each case where she won one of those properties, she had previously secured the contract for the resale because these investors were fix and flip investors. And in 1 year did something like 85 or 90 of those resales, built an entire business from working with investors.
Yeah, she made so much money that she stopped doing it and just became the investor herself, right?
Right. And I know that a lot of AREAA agents actually are either active real estate investors or interested in becoming real estate investors. But there are probably a lot of people on the call, I'm guessing, who have never attended a foreclosure sale, either a sheriff sale or a trustee sale. What's the experience like? What do you need to know before you walk in the door? And what do you expect? What should you expect while you're at that auction event? And Mike, you've run a few of these, so why don't you start there?
I mean, the first thing you need to know is the address, right? You just have to show up. Like it's just about showing up and seeing what's going on. Like
let me stop you there. Important for everybody to know that these are open procedures. Or open proceedings. These are not closed off. You don't have to sign your life away to get in. They tend to be open to the public. Although before you bid, and I know you'll get into this, you're going to have to show proof of funds in most cases prior to that. But they are open events, and it used to be that you'd have a couple people with clipboards in the corner, surrounded by 2 or 3 of their best friends, divvying up who got to buy which properties. But today they're open events, and often cried by a live auctioneer at these events. But go ahead.
No, that's true. Although you might run into a situation like in a courtroom where a sheriff's conducting a sale and it's a small space and 40 people show up and they're like, well, we don't have room for everybody to get in here. Do you have you have the proof of funds, like Rick is saying, you don't show the cashier's checks, there might not be room in that room, and you'll have to stand out in the hallway or something like that. I've seen that happen a number of times, and it's going to be different in every county. You might want to do a little bit of research in terms of, what state you're in and what county, what the procedure is. Usually if it's a sheriff sale, they'll have some instructions on their website about it. And sometimes they list the properties that are scheduled for that sale. But one of the things you should probably know is, as Jennifer was saying earlier, if there's 15 properties that are scheduled for sale, there might be 2 that go to sale. Although if they're still scheduled the day before, it's likely that a higher percentage will actually go to sale at the actual foreclosure trustee sale. And sometimes they don't like you recording or taking pictures. I mean, if it's out on the courthouse steps, they can't stop you. But if it's in a courtroom, and you've got the sheriff there and he tells you not to, I probably wouldn't. I've seen some people get the cuffs on. So especially in New York and New Jersey, like they don't mess around. So you might want to just mind your P's and Q's and pay attention and turn it into a networking scenario. But the first thing is just go. I mean, it's going to blow your mind. Like it blew my mind when I first realized what these sales were. I think I went to my first one in 2008. And I thought a foreclosure sale was just like an REO sale. I mean, I used to actually market them as that, like foreclosure sale, and it's not, right? If you think about the verb to foreclose, the foreclosure sale is like a present tense thing where a foreclosure is actually happening. The homeowner is losing the home and it's going to the bank or to an investor that bids at that sale, right? And a foreclosed property, past tense, is what we're talking about, the REOs. Those got foreclosed on and reverted to the beneficiary or the bank or HUD or Fannie Mae or whomever, and those will end up being your REO or CWCOT properties. But it's really enlightening to just go and see the sale. I wouldn't go and expect to be buying at your first sale because it might be a little intimidating.
Michael, I was going to say the same thing. I think that the more that you attend, the more comfortable you get. I think it's good experience to attend more frequently, and it's very exciting. It's not a boring morning. It's an early morning most of the time, but just to be out there and get the vibe of everybody, and who knows who you'll meet there. That, I think it's a very relationship driven part of the foreclosure sale day. You'll get to see some of the same faces, and maybe you'll make a connection that way. Also, I want to mention again that there are many times that there are people that are so excited there with one specific property that they are there to bid on, and that property got pulled. And my foreclosure group is in the morning pulling properties that for some reason, maybe it's a BK, it could have been a mod that was just last minute done, and they were notified. And I'm on my way to the courthouse thinking we've got 7 and we end up only with 4 or 5. So there's going to be a person there that's disappointed, or persons that are going to be disappointed they didn't get to even bid on that home they showed up for. So be on the lookout for those, not just those that are bidding, but maybe those that are walking away. Hey, was the house that you were looking for not there? And you can go up to each, I know in Texas you can go up to each table before they're cried and see the list, and then ask somebody that's at that table. I know auction.com is there, Zome is there. Is this the list of properties, or are any of them pulled? And then start talking to the people that are in the crowd, and then they'll find out, oh yeah, this one was pulled. Were you looking for something else? Because I can assist you.
A great way to build your prospect database from people that are actually active buyers. Chris, anything you'd add to this part of the conversation?
Well, so I've been on the buy side during the last, the Great Recession. And there was a great deal of prep work that we went into, evaluating properties, whether it's, any potential liens that didn't get noticed that we might be able to look at, looking at the properties, understanding what the comps are in that area. And I can't tell you how many times I've been down to like Harris County and then Fort Bend County in the afternoon, which is the county next to Harris. And, I'd go down with $3 million worth of cashier's checks and come home with $2.5 million because, somebody was paying over retail for the property. So really, it's one of those things that you want to know what you're buying, and you want to know all the ins and outs of it, and you're not walking through the property. So you've got to, use your best judgment, and it's not for novices. These are $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 transactions. Although I don't know about the Michael and Jennifer, but we're seeing fewer of those higher end properties going, because those generally have a workout ahead of time. We're seeing a lot. I think my average, I'm looking at it here, my average is $182,000 this month, which is, in the Dallas Fort Worth area is kind of a basic starter home.
Yep.
3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-bedroom, 1-bath. It's not a big mansion. Most of the nicer properties end up getting worked out. It's not short sold anymore because they actually have equity going before the courthouse.
So I've heard a few things here that I want to make sure we recommunicate or over communicate to the attendees. One is that attending an auction before you decide you're going to bid is absolutely critical. You need to familiarize yourself with the procedures, make sure you know what you're doing at these auctions, and that entails watching people who are successfully buying and learning how that process works. Maybe even picking their brains about how they go about the process, because a lot of those people are very happy to talk to you about things like that. Second is that attending an auction is a great way to meet buyers with cash. And in many cases, they might be new buyers with cash who don't really know what they're doing and could use some professional help and guidance. Third is that if you are interested in investing yourself, these events are a great place to invest. But the fourth one, I think, probably pretty critical here, is if you're not looking to invest yourself, the best way probably to build your business as within the foreclosure auction market is to secure some investors as clients. And a lot of agents either have never worked with investors or don't know how to work with investors. And those investors, behave a little differently than your average consumer home buyer or consumer home seller. They tend to be a little bit more business-like. Is there anything any of you would offer to agents in terms of tips for working with investors, or tips for how to structure a business relationship where you can get paid from investors that might be a little different from your standard commission rates?
The agents/brokers that I've seen that have been successful are folks that offer a solution from the beginning to the end. They're helping with the due diligence, they're helping with the rehab, they're helping with the disposition of the asset, and they're not taking large fees on any of those steps. They're becoming valuable as a resource for them. So they might get $500. $500 is what a lot of folks were getting for buying something at the courthouse steps. But they had the agreement that they would manage the rehab, and maybe it's not 10%, maybe it's 5%. And disposition, they might do it for a point or 2 points. But what that does is it makes them sticky, as I like to say. It makes them important and valuable to that investor. And I know a couple of guys here in the Dallas area that do that in 5 states now, mostly because they don't have enough inventory to do it here in just Texas. But they've become so sticky over the last 10 years that, it works out well. The investor doesn't have to hire somebody to do all of these things. And the agent can manage that on their behalf. And there's a level of trust and appreciation there.
I was doing some agent training, Chris. I think you just made a really important point. I want to make sure nobody misses it. But I mentioned working with investors, and one of the agents in the front row rolled her eyes. And I said, "Oh, I see you've worked with investors." And she said, "I have." And I said, "And I bet you have an investor who's probably asked you for a reduction in your commission." She said, "I have." And I said, "I bet that investor asks for that reduction in every transaction you do." And she said, "He does." And I said, what a terrible person. I said, and how many times did he do that last year? And she said 12. And I said, and I bet you he asked for that reduction when you bought the property with him and then sold it for him. And she said, he does. And I said, so 24 transactions that investor asked you for a discount on last year. And she said, yes. And I said, one more question. She said, shoot. I said, how many of the other agents in the room would like that investor's phone number right now? And all the hands went up. And it's a different model, but if you get a good investor as a customer, as a client, they're a repeat customer. You don't have to go out and look for that investor every time he or she is going to make a purchase. So unlike that consumer home buyer who you list a house and sell it for them and then don't hear back from them for the next 15 years while they're still in the house, in their next house, those investors are going to give you a constant flow of business over time.
And maybe even other business.
Yep. Go ahead, Jennifer.
No, I mean, it's, we all know this is a relationship driven business for an agent, a broker, and you don't know what that transaction or that relationship you have with that investor may lead to other investors or individuals that get a referral from that investor.
And I think you can also structure like what your fee percentages are going to be. If you're finding deals for like a hardcore real estate investor and that's their life, you know, like what Christopher is talking about, those guys are going to grind you on your price and you need to be that kind of resource for them. But if you're putting together a conglomerate of, you know, professionals or dentists and doctors, like I mentioned earlier, or, you know, other people that like family offices, they have this money and they're relying on you to provide those services, you know, you can structure your fee structure differently. Because you really are providing full service, whereas, you know, for a serious real estate investor that's their profession, you're providing a sniff test, right? So they're going to look at that and they might know better than you what that property is worth as a distressed property, but you giving them the after repaired value and the organization of bringing all those different comps in advance without them having to go and do it and not relying on things like Zillow and places where the data is questionable, you know, you're going to have that pulse on your own marketplace and they're going to have the investor side of it. And it's going to be two things that work really well together. So
let's take a half a step back and let's tell the agents who are on or with us today what they need to do before they go to the auction in terms of preparing themselves, whether they're bidding for themselves or they're buying for an investor. What set of disciplines do you need to go through in order to really be ready to roll when you get there? Because we've also seen people get themselves in trouble at auctions. You kind of get caught up in the excitement of the event. You wind up overpaying for a property. I've actually seen auctions where more seasoned investors will kind of work on the newbie and get them to overbid on properties, figuring, you know, once they lose their shirt on the first one, they're not going to come back and bother them again. But what recommendations would you make for agents, whether they're going to go to that auction and bid for a client or bid for themselves? What do they need to do?
Have a bottom and have a top.
Okay.
I always went with a spreadsheet of all the assets that I'd looked at and said, okay, here's the top. If it's $1 over that, I'm not doing it. This is not an emotional thing. This is a business decision. And usually that top had some wiggle room in it for, you know, the what ifs that, you know, might come up. But, you know, I can't think of a time, you know, we were doing with our money and with investor money, and investors would be upset that we didn't put their money to work. I said, listen, we either buy it right on the front side or we don't.
Yep.
It's the same thing with the agent's money. It's the same thing if they've got an investor. Have a bottom and have a top that's agreed upon, and go from there. Especially if you're anxious to try and put money to work and there's so few properties actually making it to sale. Don't exceed what you're willing to pay for a property.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The one exception to that is if you're hoping to get 5 properties and you've lost the first 4, you might go a little bit over that top number. You just don't want to go a lot over it, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to come in batting zero, right? You want to come back with at least some sort of batting average that's in the positive. And so I've seen people exceed because they do want to end up with a deal. And it's like, well, if on this formula, we're expecting to make $50,000 net in the end. I'm gonna go 10 grand over, right, and make 40 grand versus walk away with zero. Especially
I think we've skipped a step, guys. And because you've both done this, so you all already know intuitively, but you just said, I have a formula, I'm going to make $50,000. Well, what's the formula? How do we tell the agents what to expect? And I know there's some differences whether we're talking about flipping a property and making, that gross profit there, or buying a property with the notion of renting it. So what, let's take them through the first part of this before we take them to that end game. What do you do? What do you do to get ready?
Sure. Well, the first thing, you do your due diligence like you would on any property, right? But you, like what Rick was just saying, whether you're going to flip it or you're going to turn it into a rental, it's usually those two different things. Like, people are buying homes at these foreclosure sales and then moving into them eventually after they get possession of the occupancy and do the rehab, but it's usually not a high percent. Rick and I used to do these surveys actually of people that showed up at the foreclosure sale, what their intent was, and was it to move into the house or buying it for a relative. It was about 15% of people who showed up with the cashier's check. The other 85% were either renting, flipping, and about half of all people said, well, it depends on what I get it for, right? They had a formula for, if I acquire it at this price, I'm going to fix it and flip it. If I go over that price, it's going to be a hold and rent, and I'll get some rental income on it, and then I'll sell it later and take the equity that way. But I mentioned earlier a pro forma, right? A pro forma is just it's like a massive Excel file where you say, here's what I want to acquire it for. Here's what I think the after repaired value is. And here's what I think the market rent is for that property. And then it basically breaks out all these formulas that show how much money you're going to make from rent, over the course of 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, based on the money you borrowed and what your interest rate was. And that can help you determine what that price, like Christopher was saying earlier, that price that you're willing to pay at the foreclosure sale, you don't want to go over that because you want to have positive cash flow, right? So when you determine, what your acquisition price is on a rental versus on a flip, it's, what am I buying it for? What's the after repaired value? And what are my costs in between? Doing that research in advance for every property you go, and figuring out what that number is, if you want to do it for both, or if you only want to stick with one strategy. What'll happen oftentimes though is that you'll get to a price and you'll be like, well, if I go over that, I'm really cutting into the margin that I want my profit for this money that I'm going to have, right? And if you're using private money to fund these deals, or if it's cash, or some other equity source, you have to figure out what your costs are in between acquisition and disposition, right?
Yep. And I think this is where being an agent can work to your advantage. You should have a really good sense in your local market of what an as repaired property should sell for. Your guess is probably going to be better than a lot of the investors. Your guess, it's not a guess. Your estimate is probably going to be better than a lot of the investors who are there, and that's a value you can bring to your investor clients. What you might not be able to bring is, if you haven't done this before, is a realistic estimate of repair costs. And for that reason, I know a lot of people bring contractors into their networks, into their personal networks, who can take a look at a property, maybe even from the outside, and say, ballpark guess, here's what you need to set aside for repair costs. And the two biggest mistakes I've seen investors make over the years with auction properties is they've either overpaid for the asset in the first place, or they've dramatically underestimated the cost of repairs. And auction properties do come with a little bit of a higher risk because you can't do an internal inspection most of the time before the auction property is sold. I do have two questions from the group that I'd like to throw out here. First one is how easy is it to get possession of the homes? How often is a filing for an eviction needed? So Jennifer, and Mike's laughing, so I'm going to start with somebody else. Jennifer, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that's always the gamble on, the eviction process and how easy that would occur or how quickly. So that is another, when you were mentioning, due diligence, drive by, see if somebody is in the home, is their vehicle parked out there or they already moved on. So I will be the first to admit, I'm not as familiar with the eviction process as Michael or Christopher might be, but I do know that is a huge, important part of the purchase. And most of the time, yes, they are occupied, whether it's homeowner or tenant. You might be able to maybe ask neighbors or do due diligence prior to that purchase, because I think it could go two different routes, but I'll let the others chime in and give their opinions.
Yeah, I think a drive-by is critical on these properties because you're dealing with a lot of other unknowns. Christopher, a lot of these things occupied?
Yeah, it really, the lower value ones are usually more occupied than the higher value ones, because the options are fewer. I will say that knowing your local market is important, to Jennifer's point, because if I buy a house in LA County, there's some very specific things for tenants that you have to do. Well, they, might be $25,000 you've got to pay out. Same thing with Cook County. If you've got something in Jersey or in New York, I've got a New York property that we've been managing for one of our clients that I think we're on year 3 of the eviction process. And so there's a cost of carrying that if you buy it. Whereas here in Texas, we can generally make it happen in 2 months, 6 weeks, 8 weeks to get somebody out of a property. But there's a cost to it.
So you have to build that into the pro forma that Mike was talking about.
Absolutely. These are not clean the second they come out. You always have the what ifs of, gosh, we had one a couple of months ago that they put concrete down the drains before they moved out. Had to spend 20 grand to pipe an entire house. Well, that's a oopsie. But if you do 100 of these a year or 50 of these a year, it gets absorbed into the overall business.
My favorite was an agent told me that his BPO was off by about $25,000 and he couldn't understand why. And he said the servicer told him it wasn't his fault, that the previous occupant had taken out all the wiring and all the piping and then put up new drywall. So you couldn't tell that all the wiring and piping was gone. I thought
that's creative.
Yeah. Mike, any other thoughts on occupancy and eviction?
Yeah, I mean, like Christopher was saying, like New Jersey and New York, I mean, these places just take a longer time to get acquisition of the property. But there are a couple other, strategies people use. Like, it's going to cost the money. You're going to pay it to an attorney, or just say, knock on the door and just say, hey, I bought this house and I know it's an unfortunate situation, but I'm going to pay $5,000 in attorney's fees to get you evicted and have the sheriff knock on your door. I could just give that money to you, right? Just do a cash fees on this, and I'll hire a truck and you can move your stuff into one of these storage units. I think they'll probably give you the first 90 days free, and I'll some guys over here to help you. And I don't want to make this an ugly situation. And if we work together, you can get that cash, and it can help you get your start in a different way. And sometimes they're going to be very not into that idea, and they're going to yell and scream like, oh, I was trying to offer to you, and then you just walk. And that's something that an agent can actually help an investor do as well. Because like I was saying, like if you have an investor, they don't want to go drive down to somebody's house and knock on the door and do that. But that's something that you could provide as a service. Like, hey, I'm going to offer cash for keys, and you don't give them the cash until they're actually out of the house, and then you have a locksmith change the locks and secure the property, and you don't ask people to clean it. We just don't want your stuff in there. That's it.
And I would, and I will. We have to put this disclaimer on. Don't put yourself in harm's way. and
Yeah.
make sure you take all appropriate safety precautions. The other question we have, because we're talking about doing due diligence in advance of the auction, and we talked about properties in pre-foreclosure. Are there sites or resources that any of you would recommend for agents who are trying to get accurate information about homes in the earlier stages of foreclosure?
Can I say the most ironic?
Zome.com.
Well, Jennifer, does Zome have pre-foreclosure listings
We do. It'll list it and it'll have the date that it's to be cried.
So those are the properties already scheduled for auction. What about
Yes.
what about the pre-foreclosure properties? Do you have those on the site?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Now, the best place to find information on the properties that are in default, right? They've been given a notice of sale or a notice of default, is go onto the MLS, because what do people try to do before they get foreclosed? They try and sell their house. And so you might have some recent interior photos that'll give you the best intel you're going to get. You have that access, even if it's not an active listing. So agents actually have kind of the best resource to get an interior look at a property that you don't have interior access to.
But to be fair, most MLSs disallow putting information in that indicates a house is in foreclosure. So if you're talking about doing a little bit of detective work and figuring out which properties are likely to be in foreclosure, but it's not necessarily going to say this property is in foreclosure.
Yeah, but I mean, foreclosure.com and Realty Track and a few of these other sites aggregate the properties that are in foreclosure. And if you look for the ones that are in your market, and
Yes, then you can.
you have the address. So
Yeah, the other thing is, Texas is pretty simple. I mean, Michael mentioned it earlier, but the Roddy report, George Roddy and his dad before him, frankly, put together a great organization of aggregating the lists. And if not, go down to your local courthouse. You're going to see the postings, and have an idea at that point of who's in foreclosure. But the Roddy report, from a systemic way of looking at it, is very good in Texas.
So if you're looking more broadly, I can't vouch for how good it is these days. Realty Track used to be my favorite because I worked there, but there are a number of subscription-based sites that do post properties as soon as they enter foreclosure. Foreclosure.com is another one. There's a site called Foreclosure Radar that I think does a really good job. And there's it's a website called PropStream. So the foreclosure radars and the prop streams of the world are a little more expensive, but they have more tools that help you do some of the diligence work that the panel's been talking about. Some of the analytics are available in those sites as well.
Rick, I've also noticed a couple of those vendor type tables that are set up at the foreclosure sale where you can go and talk to them and discuss what those services that they can offer, and see if you want to sign up for that type of subscription.
Yep. Any other questions?
Property Shark in the Northeast too, especially in New York and New Jersey, like they have fantastic information, but like PropStream and those, you do have to pay for it. Like it's $99 a month or something like that, but it's great info.
And there is some information available on Zillow. They don't make it necessarily front and center, but on Zillow's website, you actually can find foreclosure properties. It's just, you have to dig around a bit to get there. We are almost at the top of the hour. I don't see any other questions in either the chat or the Q&A. I did post everybody's email address in the chat if you wanted to reach out to Mike or Jennifer or Christopher. I hope you've found some of this information useful and it's given you some ideas on expanding your business by working this part of the foreclosure process, which not a lot of agents do. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. And again, I want to thank our panelists for spending some time and sharing their knowledge with us. So our next webinar, we'll be talking about building an REO practice. with a whole new cast of characters. That'll be in about a month, but keep your eyes open for announcements on that. And until next time, thanks for joining us today, and happy hunting at those auctions.
Thank
Go
you.
get 'em.
everyone.
Thank you.